It's obviously a very serious video there. What appears to be something like cluster munitions being used in a residential area. It would hardly be the first time during this invasion. It is obviously wrong. In this war and in others, the US of course as well has used those munitions. But we've seen a lot of incredibly damaging, risky bombardment of areas where civilians have been killed in a number of different cities throughout this week. And so the number of Ukrainian dead on both the military and the civilian side has been rising. Let's take note though at the same time that the Russians are hardly getting through this thing without suffering any losses, despite the overall unwillingness to admit it back in the home front. So we've got some info on how they're faring. The deputy commander of the 41st Combined Arms Army, Maj Gen Andrei Sukhovetsky, whose death from a probable sniper bullet was revealed just yesterday, is currently the highest ranking member of the invasion force. A division commander and a regimental commander have also been killed in what was described as a surprising development resulting from a breakdown in command and control systems. Now, outside of the military leadership, getting a clear idea of exactly how many Russian soldiers have died in the week plus of the war is difficult. Different groups put out different numbers. I would advise you, as with every other fact being spread about this war, to take them with a major grain of salt. When the Ukrainian government lists a number of dead and the UN does, and especially when there's a very big difference between them, it is hard to know exactly who to trust. But the Russian Defense Ministry has confirmed some dead. They said at one point earlier this week, 498 Russian troops had died and about 1,600 more had been injured. To which I say, I trust their numbers no more than any other groups, of course. And there's been a great amount of analysis throughout the week of some of the reasons that the Russian effort hasn't worked as well as it was perhaps intended to. The aforementioned breakdown of command and control being a big part of it. But we have a lot more on this, including a few concerning developments that might have an impact over the weekend. But I wanted to give the panel a chance to discuss first.
Sure, I mean, just a few thoughts on this. I think and I know TYT, you all have been covering this. I've been watching your coverage, and I guess it's just it's astonishing to me the double standards that our mainstream media and generally speaking our politicians are taking toward these issues. Look, I recognize the savage invasion that has occurred, but I also recognize that what we did in Iraq is eerily similar to this, yet also much more vile. And just sort of recognizing how NATO's militarization, the buildup of NATO, and the potential militarization or inclusion into NATO of Ukraine is pretty predictable that this, I can't say that I would have predicted it would have occurred on this scale, but Russia's major identity, Putin's main political capital lies in being a foil for United States and NATO level expansion. That's all he's got. So we were playing right into his hands as we did this. And I think we're not looking at our own role within all of this in a more systemic way. So I think I'll just start by saying that, but there's just so much more to say, and I look forward to talking with you guys.
Yeah, and we will definitely be diving into that a little bit later on as well. But Anna, what are your thoughts?
Well, my views on Russia's claims of feeling that Ukraine joining NATO was a security risk and all that have evolved. Considering I really think that Putin was going to invade no matter what. I mean, days before the invasion happened, Vladimir Zelensky dropped his efforts to join NATO, and he was pretty clear and transparent about that. And if Putin's genuine concern was really NATO, which again, I'm calling into question at this point. What he has done through this invasion has been a complete and utter disaster for his own objectives, because now you have other European countries calling to join NATO, Finland being one of them. President Joe Biden met with the leader of Finland today on this very issue. And so this has been a complete and utter disaster for the Russian economy, for the alleged objectives that Vladimir Putin has in regard to NATO. And while I'm definitely ready and willing to do extensive coverage, and we have been doing extensive coverage of some of the atrocities that the United States has committed across the globe, the fact of the matter is, what Putin has done is beyond reprehensible, deplorable, absolutely disgusting, especially when you consider the fact that he's now indiscriminately firing rockets and cluster bombs in civilian areas. There was a positive development yesterday in regard to these corridors that are supposed to allow for civilians to leave the country safely. I'm obviously I'm skeptical about whether or not Russia's gonna keep its part of the deal in that regard, considering the brutality that civilians have already been facing in Ukraine. But this is just an absolutely devastating story, and I wish that things would get better. I wish that they would really sit down and genuinely engage in these peace talks and make all this pain and suffering end. I mean, the people who are still in Ukraine, the civilians who are still in Ukraine, they're dealing with a shortage of food. I mean, it is really a humanitarian crisis at this point.
Well, and it's actually funny that you mentioned that because they are having some of the same sorts of problems on the other side. So I want to give you a little bit of analysis of some of the things that are hampering the Russian war effort. Again, bearing in mind, this is coming from an actually, in this case, anonymous Western official. So bear that in mind. But their analysis is the reason why it's happening, why Russia is having so many problems, why they're moving slower, why they're suffering more casualties, is that commanders feel that they have to move further forward to get greater impetus and control over operations. And so difficulties sort of breed more difficulties. You sort of go like the effect, like the equivalent of going on tilt. That seems to be what they're indicating here. They've had a range of challenges in the execution of the plan, all of which we know were fragilities in the Russian military system, but they have somehow managed to have all of those fragilities play out simultaneously, which has led to the lack of progress. And so some specifics there. The failure to achieve air superiority, meaning that their movement of troops, and in particular the convoy, which we've been talking about, has not been free from attack from the Ukrainian military. They've been moving slowly, and that has also led to problems with supplies of food, fuel, other like necessary components of an invasion. I mean, as people always say, like soldiers are significant, but wars are won through logistics, and they're having a problem maintaining their logistical capability. Also pointing out that a lot of their forces are young and untrained, which I find to be very surprising. We had heard in advance that it's obviously an advanced military in terms of its technology, but many of their forces were supposed to have been getting some equivalent of experience in the disputed territories. So I'm a little bit surprised by some of this.
Yeah, and I want to speak to that. Even the term oligarch itself has a genesis and a basis in Russian history, in recent Russian history. And I think what we need to look at more carefully when we look at Putin, outside of all of his brutality, which I totally agree with Anna around, are the ways in which there has been a great amount of corruption that's occurred within Russia itself, where the military budget is so massive, but so much of it has been siphoned off for various sorts of special, sort of special pocketbooks, right? Is basically what that is. And I think what I was trying to speak to earlier is the larger history by which we constructed Putin as an antagonist, right? We constructed him as a foil for us, and actually that kind of served our own purposes, the United States and NATO's, and now that's blowing back at us. That both benefited Putin and at that time benefited ourselves. And we have to just look at the history of how we essentially liquidated Russia during the Yeltsin time and essentially turned it into a neoliberal state without any sort of social safety net. So my compassion, my heart, my sort of political spirit lies with the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia and the bravery, I know you guys have been reporting it, of the people in Russia itself. So all of these, they are the ones who are being brutally victimized by these awful decisions that have been made by many of those in power across the board.
Yeah, and I wanted to speak to what you were mentioning earlier, John, in regard to the troops. When you really think about the propaganda that the Russian people and the Russian troops have been consuming as a result of like state-sponsored media in Russia, there was one independent news source left, and that has been shut down by the Russian government. But the troops were fed complete and utter lies about what they were going into Ukraine for. Remember, Putin refuses to call this an invasion. He refuses to call this a war. He keeps alleging that this is just a military operation. And the troops were under the impression, because of this propaganda, that they were going into a country to liberate the people of Ukraine. The thinking was that these are individuals who want to be part of Russia. These are individuals who feel that they're being held back, held down by the current Ukrainian government. And when they invaded, they were a little surprised by the type of response they received from Ukrainians. And so there is a lack of morale. I think that Putin certainly miscalculated how this invasion would play out. And if you all can notice, in the 6th day of this war, Putin just became much more brutal, especially when it came to these strikes in civilian areas. You can tell that he's kind of acting impulsively out of frustration and rage because things haven't really played out the way that he expected it to. Now, with that said, though, the situation on the ground still appears to be very scary for the Ukrainian people. Especially when you read stories about Russia now taking control of Europe's largest nuclear power plant. That's certainly scary. And there's, of course, still many questions in regard to why Putin's doing that in the first place. There's the pretty scary concern regarding using the nuclear power plant as a threat, essentially causing some sort of meltdown, which would honestly be destructive not only for Ukraine but several countries, including Russia. I don't think that's a good idea. But I mean, who knows what Putin's capable of doing? He seems like a person who honestly has made decisions that make me question whether he's a rational actor in all of this, because he's done things that go against his own objectives in the short term and in the long run. And then final thing is, the nuclear power plant issue. It's to make, if Russia has control over electricity and energy in the country, it could really use that to put more pressure on the Ukrainian people, make them suffer more. And they're already having issues with power outages and things like that. So it's just a devastating story. And I want nothing more than for these peace talks and a more diplomatic approach to continue, because really innocent people are gonna continue dying otherwise.
I mean, I very much agree with that. I think that any form of de-escalation is absolutely necessary right now. And maybe there are some ways in which negotiations can occur to sort of de-escalate some of NATO's own activities that might be some sort of exchange here. But I think your larger point, Anna, is well taken, which is what is Putin's end game here? That seems extremely unclear. I think it seems like the assumption was that the Ukrainians would merely lie down and take this. But if anything, what's occurred, very much unlike what happened in Iraq, is the entire world has been supporting the Ukrainians, which I'm grateful for. And it's not clear what's going to happen as a result. Also, just to note that the people of the Donbass, as well as Crimeans, many of them are ethnically also Russian, and also that there was a puppet pro-Russian government that was installed, and that the revolution about a decade ago got rid of, a democratic revolution. And then just one final point, Putin has claimed that one of his ridiculous reasons for this invasion, brutal, a war crime on every level, I agree, was the denazification of Ukraine. That's sort of bizarre given that apparently the president of Ukraine himself is Jewish. So.
Yeah, and it's been sad to see some who generally are pretty critical of propaganda used to justify wars accepting that. When literally every government that invades a country says it's to stamp out radicals in that country. It's the most, we've done it so many times. And the parallels are so robust. Anna talking about the propaganda that was told to the soldiers about they'd be greeted as liberators and all that. Well, we were told that by all of our leaders in the run up to the war in Iraq. And yeah, there's just a lot of that.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that All you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.